My new neighbor blushed the day I joked and called her wife. And then she whispered something that undid me. I'd love that. I was the divorced guy on Birchwood Lane who talked to his dog more than to people, watching an empty house from my kitchen window for 8 months, certain I was done being anyone's husband. She was the runaway bride who moved in next door to escape a wedding that never happened, fighting a dresser through her own front door, fighting harder not to need anyone again. It started as a joke to rescue her from a pushy stranger at a block party, but the second that word left my mouth, her cheeks went pink, her voice went soft, and something true slipped out wearing a joke's clothes. Neither of us laughed, because two lonely people had just stumbled onto something neither was brave enough to name. But what does a man do when the woman he's falling for whispers, "I'd love that"? And then her almost husband shows up on her porch with flowers 3 weeks later. What happens when the thing you want most is the exact thing you've taught yourself to run from first? And how does a single soft whisper said as a joke become the truest thing either of us ever meant? Let me take you back to the morning it started. A gray Tuesday, lukewarm coffee in my hand. My dog Otis pressed against the window like he already knew something I didn't. For 8 months, the house next door had been empty. I knew it the way you know a wound, by checking on it too often. Then the for sale sign disappeared, and a moving truck backed into that driveway like it was answering a question I hadn't asked out loud. A woman stepped out, dark hair losing a fight with gravity. A flannel shirt that had never once been used for actual labor, and a dresser she was dragging through her own front door sideways, which, I could have told her, was never going to work. Otis whined at the door, pawed it once. I told myself I was helping because of the dresser. But the truth is, some part of me had been waiting 8 months for a reason to cross that lawn. "You're going to lose," I called out. "If you keep trying to bring it in sideways." She looked up, startled, holding that dresser like it owed her rent. "We got it through clean." She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the truck arrived. "I'm Daniel," I said. "Next door." "Emma," she said, and didn't ask the question everyone else always asked first. "Married? Kids?" She just wiped her palm on her jeans and shook my hand like it was the simplest thing in the world. I offered her coffee. Bad coffee, I warned her. I didn't know yet how right I'd be. I burned it completely. The kitchen filled with a smell like a campfire that had made several poor life choices. She drank it anyway, didn't even flinch. She was a teacher, she said. Just transferred. Wanted something quieter. She didn't say quieter than what, and I didn't ask because I already understood that some people move not toward something but away from it. She left an hour later with a smile that stayed in my kitchen long after she did. 8 days passed before the storm hit. It came in fast and mean off the ridge, and by 7 that night, half the street had lost power. I was on my couch with a candle stub and a nervous dog when a knock came at my door. Quick, a little shaky. Emma stood there soaked through, holding a flashlight that had already given up. "This is going to sound ridiculous," she said, "but I don't know where my breaker box is, and I have never in my life felt this alone in the dark in a house that isn't mine yet." I let her in without a second thought. We sat on my floor in front of the fireplace for 3 hours. Candlelight does something to people. It strips away the small talk, leaves only the real thing underneath. She told me about the wedding that never happened. 3 weeks out. Dress already altered. A man named Connor who sat her down and said he wasn't sure, and then, somehow, became completely sure, just not about her. She said it steady. Almost too steady. I told her about my own ending. No scandal, no betrayal. Just two people who wanted different shapes of life and didn't notice until the shapes stopped fitting. A job 3 states away she couldn't turn down. A marriage that didn't break loudly. It just went quiet, and then it was gone. Amicable, I said, is a word people use so divorce sounds like a business merger. It hollows you out exactly the same. She looked at me like she understood that particular kind of hollow better than anyone had in 2 years. When the power flickered back on, it felt almost like an interruption. I walked her home with a flashlight that worked. At her door, she paused. Rain still caught in her hair, porch light gold above her. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight." "Anytime," I told her. And I meant it more than that word usually means. I walked home slower than I needed to. By the first weekend of October, the whole street smelled like 5 competing chili recipes and somebody's questionable decision to put a popcorn machine right beside the bounce house. Mrs. Calloway threw her harvest block party every year, and this time Emma and I walked over together because by now walking separately would have felt stranger than walking together. We'd become something neither of us had named yet. Coffee most mornings. Dinners twice a week we both still called just being neighborly. Like the phrase was a life raft we kept climbing back onto so we wouldn't have to look at the water underneath. That night, a man named Greg, somebody's overconfident cousin, cornered Emma by the chili table, asked if she was single, asked again when she tried to deflect, asked a third time about her plans Friday. I watched her smile go thin at the edges, watched her eyes flick toward me just once the way you look toward an exit. I crossed the yard, slid an arm easy around her shoulders. Actually, I said, she's my wife. Sorry, Greg. You're a little late to this one. Came out lighter than I expected. More reflex than plan. The kind of joke you make just to clear a room. Greg apologized too many times and retreated toward the popcorn machine. Emma laughed. But her cheeks had already gone pink, and not from the October cold. And she didn't step out from under my arm the way I half expected her to. Wife? She repeated, slow, like she was trying the word on for size. Then quieter. Almost like she hadn't fully decided to let the words out at all. I'd love that. I felt it land somewhere under my ribs. Sharper than a joke should ever be able to land. Neither of us said anything else. The party kept moving around us. Mrs. Calloway's chili won again. A kid somewhere cried about a balloon, the same 4 songs looped on someone's radio. But Emma and I stood there in the middle of it, not quite looking at each other, both of us very aware that something true had just walked out wearing a joke's clothes. I thought about those 4 words the whole walk home. But I had no idea yet how much they were about to cost, or how far either of us would have to fall and almost lose before either of us said them again and actually meant it. The next few weeks should have been the happiest of my life. They almost were. Otis and Walter struck up an unlikely truce, the cat sitting just out of Paw's reach, supremely unimpressed, while my dog lost his entire mind about it every single morning. Emma and I built a bookshelf in my shop, actually built it this time, instead of me tearing apart one I didn't need just to have something to do with my hands. She sanded the edges smoother than I would have bothered to. A thing should be done right, she said. Or not at all. I watched her say that and thought, quietly, I'd like to be done right. By someone. Maybe her. I didn't say it out loud. We were 2 people very good, by then, at not saying the true thing. My friend Marcus came by one evening and clocked it in about 4 seconds flat. Just neighbors, he repeated. Watching us argue about paint stain undertones like the fate of the house depended on it. Sure. Just neighbors who finish each other's sentences. Walnut undertone, Emma said, holding up the sample card like courtroom evidence. It matters. Marcus caught my eye later in the kitchen. You know you're in trouble, right? I'm aware, I said. Does she know you're aware? I didn't answer that one. The honest answer was no, because the second I say it out loud, it stops being safe. But safety, I was about to learn, is not something you get to keep just by staying quiet. Connor showed up on a Saturday in November. I wasn't there for the knock. I was walking Otis past her house 20 minutes later, same route I always took, and I saw them on her porch. Flowers in his hand, his shoulders hunched in that universal posture of a man asking for something he already knows he doesn't deserve. My stomach dropped before my brain had even caught up to why. I'd seen that posture before. I'd lived the other side of it. Me asking, someone's arms crossed. The whole shape of an ending that was already decided before the words caught up to it. Except this time I wasn't the one asking. I was the one standing on the sidewalk, watching someone else's almost husband try to undo 3 weeks of devastation with a bouquet from the grocery store. I lifted a hand. I'm not even sure either of them saw it. And then I did the thing I am least proud of in this entire story. I went home. I told myself it wasn't my business. That's true, technically. But underneath that, in the part of me I don't usually let anyone see, a much older, much uglier voice was whispering something I recognized instantly, because I'd heard it before, 2 years ago, in my own kitchen, the night Claire told me about the job 3 states away. Here it comes again. The part where you find out you weren't enough to stay for. I didn't answer Emma's text that night, or the one the next morning. Just 3 words, "Hey, you around?" Sitting there on my phone like a small, patient knock I refused to open the door to. One day became 3. I sanded a board in my shop that didn't need sanding. My hands remembered exactly how to do this, how to disappear into wood grain instead of feeling anything. It was the same trick they'd learned after the divorce. I thought I'd unlearned it. I hadn't. I'd just been waiting for a reason to use it again. On the 3rd evening, I noticed Otis sitting at the fence line, staring at her dark porch like he'd lost something too. That's when Marcus called, and I made the mistake of answering. "You're an idiot," he said, with the directness of a man who'd earned the right over 15 years of friendship. "Thanks for that. You saw a guy on a porch and decided the whole thing was over, without asking one single question. That's not protecting yourself, man. That's just leaving first, so it stings less when you imagine someone else doing it to you." I wanted to argue. Instead, I sat there with cold coffee in my hands and let it land, because the thing about Marcus is, he's rarely wrong about me, especially when I'd very much prefer that he was. The truth, once I finally let myself look straight at it, was uglier and simpler than I wanted. I was scared. Scared of being someone's almost enough again. So scared of being left a second time that I'd left first, quietly, with silence instead of words, and called it protecting myself. But protecting myself from what exactly? From a woman who left her porch light on for me. From a chipped blue coffee mug I now kept on my own shelf without remembering when I decided to. From a cat who tolerated my dog out of what I was pretty sure, by now, was real affection. I missed her so much it embarrassed me. Fear doesn't actually protect you from loss. It just guarantees you lose the thing on your own terms, and calls that a victory. I didn't want a victory like that. Her porch light was on when I walked over, hands shoved in my pockets, rehearsing absolutely nothing, because I already knew if I rehearsed it, I'd lose the nerve halfway across the lawn. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been watching for me the same way I'd once watched an empty house from my kitchen window. "He came to apologize," she said, before I could get a single word out. I told him within 90 seconds there wasn't anything to come back to. I didn't feel anything when I saw him, Daniel. Not anger, not longing, just relief that it was finally, actually over. Her voice caught, just slightly. "What hurt was you disappearing for 3 days without asking me a single thing about it." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I saw him on your porch and I went straight to the worst story I already knew how to tell myself. And I didn't give you the chance to tell me the real one." "Why?" "Because I've been the guy who got left for someone else's idea of a better life," I said, and the words came out rougher than I meant. "And some part of me has been waiting this whole time for you to remember you deserve better than a divorced man who talks to his dog more than to people." She reached out and took my hand, right there on her porch, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "I don't want better than you," she said. "I want you." We stood there a long time, her hand in mine, the porch light doing its quiet work above us. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence between us didn't feel like something either of us needed to fill with a joke. But something was different now. The word wife was still sitting between us, exactly where she'd left it that night at the chilly table, and we both knew, standing there in the cold, that sooner or later, one of us was going to have to pick it up again. Weeks passed. Early winter now. Frost silvering the grass most mornings, the kind of cold that makes a porch blanket and 2 mugs of coffee feel like the entire point of having a porch at all. We sat under one blanket, Otis sprawled across both our feet like he'd appointed himself official keeper of the moment. Steam curled off the coffee. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I'd been carrying the question for weeks by then, turning it over so many times in my head it had gone smooth, like a stone worn down by water. But carrying a question and actually asking it out loud are 2 completely different kinds of brave. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "About the block party." She glanced over, already half smiling, like she somehow knew exactly where this was going. "Mrs. Calloway's chili. Still undefeated." "Not the chili." I turned to face her properly, and my heart picked up speed in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "When I said you were my wife." As a joke, to get Greg to leave you alone. You said you'd love that. I'd rehearsed a dozen smoother ways to say this, and none of them came out. So I just said it plain. I've thought about it almost every day since. I need to know if you meant it as a joke. Or if you meant it the other way. She went quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet. The kind where someone is making sure the words come out true before they let them go. I meant it the other way, she said. I just didn't expect to mean it that fast. About someone I'd known a month. It scared me a little, if I'm honest. She paused. It still does. A bit. It scares me too, I admitted. I think that might just be what it feels like when something's real instead of safe. I took her hand. It was becoming a habit I had absolutely no interest in breaking, and felt my pulse going faster than the moment probably called for. Except I think it called for exactly that. So I'm asking for real this time, I said. Not to get rid of Greg. Not as a joke. If I called you my wife, someday when we're both ready, no rush, just someday, would that still be something you'd want? She didn't make me wait. I'd love that, she whispered. Same 4 words. Same soft catch in her voice. But this time there was nothing for either of us to laugh off afterward. This time, the words had nowhere else to go but exactly where they landed. I kissed her then. Slow, certain, frost glittering on the grass around us. Otis sighing dramatically at our feet like he'd been waiting months for us to catch up to something he'd known all along. A year later, Mrs. Calloway's backyard looked almost the same as it had that night. String lights crossing the yard, folding chairs in uneven rows, somebody's chili simmering somewhere it had absolutely no business being at a wedding. Except this time the lights were strung for us. Emma stood across from me in a dress the color of the first frost, and I had never in my life felt less like the man who used to talk mostly to his dog. I called it, Mrs. Calloway told anyone who'd stand still long enough to listen. More than once that day. The second he put his arm around her at my chilly table. You can't fool an old woman who's watched the street for 30 years. Marcus stood beside me as best man, wearing the smug expression of a friend who'd been right and had no intention of ever letting me forget it. Otis wore a small bow tie he hated with his entire soul. Walter, true to character, supervised the whole ceremony from the safety of a nearby fence post. Unmoved, unimpressed, magnificent. When I think back to that gray Tuesday morning, lukewarm coffee, an empty house, a dresser stuck sideways in a doorframe, I don't think I'd have believed any of this. Not the wife, not the wedding, not the particular kind of full a house can feel when it finally has someone in it who chose again and again to stay. But Emma slipped her hand into mine as the leaves came down gold and red around us. Same as the year we met. And I understood something I hadn't let myself believe in a long time. Some jokes turn out to be the truest things you've ever said. You just have to be brave enough to say them twice, once by accident and once on purpose. So here's what I want to leave you with. Somewhere out there, you might already be living next door to the person who could change your whole life. And the only thing standing between you and them might not be distance or timing or fear of getting hurt again. It might just be 3 small words you've never had the courage to say out loud. And mean. If saying them could either break your heart all over again, or finally build the home you've been quietly aching for, would you have the courage to say them anyway?